So half a world away from where we're standing right here, millions of people are practicing dry heat cooking with fat. They're sautéing, and yet they've probably never thought of it that way. They've instead thought of it as stir-frying. But really those two techniques are the same. Stir-frying is nothing more than sautéing with a Chinese passport. So we're going to take a look today at stir-frying. And what I want you to remember is everything you learned already about sauté, you bring to bear on what we're doing in the kitchen today. You don't have to start from scratch. You've already got a leg up on the competition. Take a look at what I've got over here. If you'll remember, this pan is called a sauteuse, and it has sloping sides, and the sloping sides are handy because you can use it to toss food. It sort of throws the food right back on itself. This is a great little trick to have. In Vietnam, they've got a dish called shaking beef, and that dish was named by the Vietnamese cooks who saw the French chefs put meat into a pan and shake it around. They were used to doing something very different. They were used to a pan that looks like this. They were used to a wok. And a wok has steeper sides that are sloped more acutely, and it's designed so that rather than having to toss the food, the pan delivers the food back to the hottest part of the pan again and again and again. That's the idea here. Now, if you work in a professional kitchen, especially in Asia, they have stoves that are incredibly powerful. Those stoves deliver a tremendous amount of heat to this pan, and so unless you cut the food very, very small, it will probably burn on the outside before it's cooked on the inside. Our stoves don't get nearly as hot, but we're going to cut the food the same way. We need to regulate the heat with stir-fry the same way we did as sautéing, but recognize that chances are we're going to keep it up full blast for the entire time. What I'd like to make with you is a dish from Vietnam. It's called warm vegetables on cool noodles, and what it is really a noodle salad that has stir-fried vegetables that go right on top. It's a very, very simple vegetable stir-fry, and I think it's a great way to start to cut our chops where stir-frying is concerned. So let's jump right into it. I've got the ingredients all laid out here in front of me, and we'll make our way through them little by little. The dish begins with a noodle salad, and that noodle salad has rice noodles that have already been cooked, and to that noodle salad, I'm going to add a couple of different ingredients. I'm going to add shredded lettuce. I'm going to add shredded cabbage. And the watchword with Vietnamese food is all very, very delicate. So I don't want any big pieces of cabbage in here. I'm going to add bean sprouts as well. And then another of the hallmarks of Vietnamese food is lots and lots of fresh herbs. So I've got mint here, a big handful of mint actually, and I'm going to take these leaves and I'm just going to tear them up and I'm going to add them to this noodle salad. All right, that's where this dish begins. Let me set that aside. Our warm stir-fry is actually going to be served right on top of this salad. And so that we're ready, I'm going to transfer it to a platter. If you ever have any trouble with these noodles, once they're cooked, sticking to themselves, just moisten them with a little bit of water and they'll come right apart again. I want to make a little nest of this salad, and that looks about right to me. I'm going to take this, clean it up, and set it aside. That can go on the table. You can make this ahead. It will last very, very nicely for an hour or two. Next, we're going to make a sauce. And I'll show you the ingredients right here. And I'll show you a piece of equipment that you may or may not be familiar with. This is a mortar and pestle. And traditionally, this sauce would be made in a mortar and pestle. If you don't have this, you don't have to pound the ingredients. They can be sliced very, very fine or minced up using your knife. But if you've got it, it's not a bad idea. What I would do if I were making this sauce for you right now is I would take chilies and garlic and ginger, and I would pound them all together into an aromatic paste in the mortar and pestle. And then I would moisten that with lime juice. I would cut the acidity of that lime juice with sugar, and I would put soy sauce in on the top. Typically, the sauce is a little assertive at that point, so maybe a couple of tablespoons of water could make it less assertive. And then I would chop cilantro, and I would garnish it with chopped cilantro. This is what the finished sauce looks like right here. And I'm going to taste it and explain to you exactly what I taste. I think that might be helpful. Keep in mind, this is a vegetarian sauce, as is the entire dish. It has a wonderful savory flavor, and that savory flavor comes from the soy sauce. There's a lot of heat from those Thai bird chilies. Those can be hot chilies, so exercise a little bit of care. If you don't like your food too hot, start with half the quantity and then move up to the full quantity. It's got nice, bright acidity, maybe a little bit too much because it has to flavor this entire salad. And then it has the aroma of cilantro, which to me is a little bit citrusy. This is a great sauce. All right, we'll set that here next to our plate. And I'm going to set these chopped peanuts there as well. And let's move on to the heart and soul of this dish, which is the stir fry itself. I have the wok on the heat. It's getting hot already. Just to review dry heat cooking with fat, we need an oil that can withstand high temperatures. And I've got some canola oil right here. All of the ingredients for this stir fry are all laid out. And this is an important point, and I really want to underscore this again and again and again. When you're doing a stir fry, the action unfolds so quickly that if you're not organized like this, even to the point of having your ingredients in the opposite order you need them, you may well crash and burn. Better by far that you think through the process, you get your table set, you get your pan ready, and you get things at arm's length so that you don't have to stop for even a second. So I'm going to stir fry onions, and then I'm going to put these other three ingredients in. I also have some broccoli here that is part of this stir fry, and I've got a concern that I'd like to share with you. With this stove that doesn't have a tremendous amount of firepower, this may not get cooked in the same amount of time that these things do. And so I'm going to show you a trick. Right next door, I've got a pot of water. I'm going to season that water with salt. And before we begin our stir fry, I'm going to drop this broccoli into the water. It can cook while we're stir frying the rest of the ingredients. And then just before it's done, I'm going to scoop the broccoli out, cooked and hot and delicious, and add it to the pan. That's the plan. All right, I just turned the heat up all the way. You want the thermal mass of this pan to get nice and hot, okay? I would expect that when we put oil into this pan, it will begin to smoke almost immediately. If you want to evaluate how hot that wok is, take a little bit of water and see exactly what happens. I don't know if you can see it skittering around this pan. That bead of water is riding on a cushion of steam. It's almost like a perpetual motion device. And very, very quickly it will evaporate. It's actually not evaporating as fast as you might think because that steam between the droplet and the pan is insulating the water from the heat below. We'll get rid of it. But this pan is pretty hot already. Now, everything in order. The salad is there, the sauce is there, the garnish is there. All of our vegetables are arranged in the order that I need them. I've got my seasoning, which is soy sauce, and this is scallion oil. I just cooked a scallion in a little bit of oil, and I pureed it in the blender. I've got my canola oil, and I've got some tools to manipulate the food. I think it's time to jump in with both feet. So, step one, in goes the broccoli. That won't take more than about 40 seconds, but we should be ready for it. Step two, add oil, and you see it start to smoke almost immediately, and so we've got to stop that cooking or stop that oil from burning, and usually I begin with the onions so that some of the harsh sulfurous compound of that onion can start to pass off and vaporize. Next, I'm going to add the remainder of these ingredients. I've got carrots, I've got red peppers, and I've got shiitake mushrooms. And again, we're going to stir fry these. I told you already that the watchword for Vietnamese food is delicate. So all these vegetables were cut pretty small, and they should cook quickly. Ideal is if we don't see a lot of moisture beginning to collect in this pan. If we do, we're no longer stir frying. What we're doing is simmering. But I don't see any moisture. As soon as it comes from the vegetables, it evaporates, and you can see it sort of in the steam above the pan. Because these were cut so fine, they will cook very, very quickly. I'm going to spread them to the edges of the pan, and I'm going to put a little bit of soy sauce right against the hot metal. That way my vegetables will stay nice and brightly colored. I'll just let that cook until the soy sauce reduces a little bit, and then we can toss everything together. And I think it's time to add some broccoli to this stir fry. Make sure the water is out of it. If we had been sautéing, that's what the process would look like. But I think Chinese chefs and Vietnamese chefs recognize that it's much easier just to leave the pan stationary and toss the food over the heat. All right, I'm going to turn this off. I would like to just taste to make sure I'm happy with the flavor. I'm going to add a little bit more salt. That could easily be soy sauce as well. And just to make it easier on myself, I'm going to bring this platter back, and we're going to put the warm stir fry directly on top of this noodle salad. Now, up to this point, there is no dressing on this noodle salad. Up to this point, there is just the seasoning that was already in the stir fry. I'm going to dress it first with a little bit of this scallion oil, and that'll get really aromatic as it hits these hot vegetables. And then I'm going to take this dipping sauce, the cilantro lime dipping sauce, and I'm going to spoon that over the dish. I would also send the extra to the table so that people could add it to their own taste. And then finally, this is a vegetarian dish, but it would be nice if there was some protein in there, so here comes some chopped peanuts. And that's a pretty traditional garniture in Vietnam. Maybe just a little glisten from more oil, and we'll call it a day. Warm vegetables on cool noodles. This is really a great introduction to stir fry. Fast, furious, easy to do, and it makes a really delicious meal. All right, now we're going to make ma pa tofu, which is a tofu, a grandmother's tofu that comes from the Sichuan region in China. Before we make the stir fry itself, it's time for us to make the rice that's going to be served with that tofu. So I want to show you the way oftentimes it's done in China. I've got a measured amount of rice here. I measured it by volume. And the first thing I want to do is wash this rice in abundant water. And what you'll see very, very quickly is the starch on the surface of the rice will begin to cloud this water. If I don't take this off, what will end up happening is I will get a pot of rice that is sticky. That's the best way of describing it. And a little sticky is okay. It makes it easy with chopsticks, but too sticky, and I think it's objectionable. So we rinse all the surface starch off the rice. You can do it in the sink as well, put it into a colander and rinse it in the sink. But for our purposes here, I think having it in a bowl like this is just right. And then, once you've rinsed off the starch, get rid of it. And for every rice that you cook, you will have a measured amount of water that's appropriate for that rice. So as an example, if I were making brown rice here, I would use 2.5 times as much water as I have rice. If I were using Uncle Ben's converted rice, typically they use twice as much water as rice. And for the rice I'm using here, I want about 1.5 times as much water. I have that water already measured out in this pot right here. I'm going to put the rice in. If I were cooking rice in America, typically I would season that water with a little bit of salt, but in China, typically the rice is cooked without any seasoning at all. The idea being that our stir fry will have plenty of seasoning to flavor this rice. So, here, the rice goes in. I bring it back up to a boil. And as it comes to a boil, then it can get turned down to a simmer. It's not quite there yet. It's close. You'll see some people that will tell you that they measure the water for rice by putting the rice in and then putting their finger on the top of the rice and bringing the water up to their first knuckle. I think you're better off measuring it, but that's my own opinion. All right, as it comes up to a boil, what I would have you do is reduce the heat so that it's at a nice simmer. You don't want it to boil hard. You don't want the rice to break up. And once it's at a simmer, put the lid back on and let it cook. Rice, white rice like this, when I was in school, I was told to cook it for 17 minutes and 32 seconds. And when I said, really? 17 minutes, 32 seconds? The chef instructor that was teaching me said, if I told you 15 minutes, you would forget. So 17 minutes and 32 seconds, the rice will be done. What you're looking for is for all of the moisture to be absorbed, no more free liquid in the pan, and the rice should be tender all the way through. I've got a pan right here, and we'll bring it over and take a look at it. This was cooked already. It's been off the stove now. There's a little bit of steam, but it's been off the stove for a while. There's no free liquid in the bottom of the pan. And after it has a chance to sit for about 10 minutes, right after it's cooked, it's very, very delicate. So just let it sit for about 10 minutes and then come in with a fork and you can fluff it up. You can sort of break up any stickiness. And you know, this will stay warm probably for an hour or more. And if you're curious as to whether or not it's fully cooked, just taste it. There should be no chalky core at the center of that rice. All right, let's set that aside. And we'll talk about our stir fry. This is ma pa tofu. This is a tofu dish that is named after the grandmother that used to make it. So, the ingredients are all laid out here. Let me walk you through them very, very quickly. Over on this side, I have aromatic vegetables. I've got onions, I've got garlic, and I've got ginger. That is the beginning of a lot of different stir fries. Those three things go into a hot wok and they'll tell you that they explode into fragrance. That's what you're looking for. And then I've got some sauce condiments here. Here is black bean paste. This is fermented black bean paste. And this fermented black bean paste is made not with black beans, but with soybeans that turn black when you ferment them. It has a wonderful savory flavor. Savory flavor that will flavor a large amount of vegetables. Everything from tofu to peppers to this pot of rice. And then I've got oyster sauce, which I'm going to add a little bit later on. Oyster sauce is wonderfully savory as well. It's made from the liquor that comes from oysters, which then is allowed to reduce down, and get very concentrated. And finally, a chili paste, a Korean chili paste, which has a good deal of heat to it, but also a wonderful richness and depth that I find captivating. Right next door here, I've got dried mushrooms. These are dried shiitake mushrooms. And I have taken them and soaked them in water until they're tender. And then once they're soaked in water, I took the stem out, which tends to be really woody, and you can see they've been cut very fine into little thin slivers. These will lend a meatiness to our stir fry as well. Remember, we're dealing with tofu, and tofu doesn't have a tremendous amount of flavor all its own. The vegetables that go into this are beans. It could be snow peas. I'm using Romano beans here. Red peppers and bean sprouts. The tofu is firm tofu. I've got a piece of it right here. Very firm. What's important is that this should get cut up ahead, and I've diced it up. You can see the size right here, and then fried in hot fat until it becomes golden on the outside. It takes 3-4 minutes at about 350 degrees before it takes on this golden color and gets a little bit of a skin. That'll give it more flavor, but more than that, it will help it hold its shape in the stir fry that's to come. We'll set that aside. When you buy tofu, just a word of warning, you can get it in soft, medium, and firm. You can also find silken tofu, which is almost like the most delicate custard you've ever had. So be careful to get the firm tofu. You want one that is firm, that will hold its shape when you fry it. And then finally, I've got some finishing ingredients here, and let me just explain what they are. If you want your stir fry to be a little bit hotter, I've got white pepper, which is traditional in China, and some cayenne or chili pepper. For my taste, I don't think we need a lot of cayenne. I've got over here the chili paste already, and a little white pepper is probably enough. I'll set those aside. I'm also going to sprinkle chopped cilantro on the top. Very aromatic, and if I add it any earlier until the end, I'll lose that aroma. So that is a finishing spice. And then finally, this is a curiosity. This is Szechuan peppercorns. It's not a true peppercorn. Instead, it is a spice that when you eat it, gives you a little bit of a numbing quality. And it may seem awkward if you taste it on your own. It might even make your tongue numb and make you feel like you've just come from the dentist. But in a stir fry, in a lot of vegetable matter, it gives an intriguing textural flavor quality that's hard to describe, but it's really appealing. So we'll set that aside as well. This goes in first, followed by this, and then we add the tofu towards the end and finish with these finishing ingredients. I'm going to bring the wok over. We'll get it nice and hot. Our rice is cooking away nicely. And I'm going to turn the heat down just a little bit. I said it before, but it's worth saying again. This stove and your stove at home likely is not as hot as the wok stoves that you might see in a commercial kitchen. So give yourself the time to have a pan on the heat so that the thermal mass of that pan can get nice and hot. Here's another thought, and that is that if this pan is heavier, then likely it could hold more heat up front. Traditionally, woks are very thin steel. But this particular wok is a little bit heavier, and you might even be able to find a cast iron wok that holds heat really, really well. If you don't even have a wok, remember you can use a saute pan, or if you're lucky enough to have a nicely seasoned cast iron pan, that may be the best of all possible worlds because it will hold the heat that you put into it in anticipation of the food to come. Let's see how hot this wok is by a little splash of water. We'll dump that water out. I think we're in good shape. Nice and hot. Just to review, we start with the aromatics. When the aromatics explode into flavor, then we add the vegetables. Once the vegetables are in there, I'm going to add these sauce ingredients and we'll stir fry that all together. And these sauce ingredients will flavor all of these vegetables, as will the aromatic vegetables. When those are nearly done, the tofu goes in to warm up, and then finally we use these ingredients as finishing ingredients. And let me bring them up on deck. Without any further ado, let's get started. Okay, there's a little bit of water still living in the bottom of that pan. I want that to go away. And the oil goes in. Almost immediately it begins to smoke, and so we add these aromatic vegetables, and already they've exploded into fragrance. I don't want to burn them, and so we move forward, and in goes all of these vegetables. Okay, once the vegetables are in, that takes some of the heat of that oil down, so keep it on the stove over high heat. We're also going to add the mushrooms at this point. And if you see your vegetables beginning to scorch at all, it just means that you have to keep them moving a little bit faster. Hopefully you get the sense that you don't have a lot of free time to wait between one addition and the next. So make sure your mise en place is as it should be, impeccable. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take these sauce ingredients and I'm going to mix them here in a little bowl with some water. In goes the black bean paste. In goes the oyster sauce. And in goes the chili paste. And we'll mix those together. At this point, I'm going to add the tofu in as well. Just a quick splash of water. I'm seeing that sauce catching on the pan, so I'm just going to rinse it off. I don't want so much water that I'm simmering these vegetables. I want just enough to keep the heat very high. Now, it's just about time to finish this up. I'm going to add a little bit of white pepper. White pepper has an interesting sour flavor that black pepper does not have. Black pepper has a richer, deeper flavor. So white pepper is an interesting choice here. It lends a little bit of sourness and brightness to this. I'm going to add the Szechuan peppercorns, sprinkle them in, and that will give us the numbing effect that I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to turn the wok off, but at the very end, I'm going to add sesame oil. Sesame oil is an aromatic oil, and we want to maintain that aroma. So as it hits that hot pan, already I can smell the wonderful aroma. And I'm going to add the cilantro. And this stir fry is done. Start to finish, probably not more than 3 or 4 minutes. Let's go ahead and plate this. I've got a nice bowl. We've got the rice already cooked and waiting. One of the perks of the job is that I'm the first person that gets a chance to taste this. This is really an important step. I'm going to add just a little bit more of salt and just a splash of water. The sauce is a little bit tight. I want it to taste looser. There's that wonderful numbing quality that I get from the Szechuan peppercorn that's really pretty intriguing. And we'll bring this over and spoon it right onto the rice. This is a vegetarian dish saved for the oyster sauce, although you can find vegetarian versions of oyster sauce, so you don't have to look too hard for that. And that is a beautiful bowl of ma pa tofu. This is a Szechuan dish, spicy, a little bit numbing, very, very savory, really, really delicious. Now, before we leave stir frying, I want to say a couple of things. If you're a Chinese chef, you have an idea about why you go to all the effort of doing what we did here today. The idea or the concept is one called wok hei, which is loosely translated as the breath of the wok. When you take food and you cook it as quickly and as assertively as you do in a wok, what ends up happening is that it's almost like the food forgets that it's even fresh or forgets that it's being cooked. It tastes as though it is still fresh. It cooks so quickly that its vitality is there and undeniable. If I were to take this and put it in a steam table for 45 minutes, that vitality would pass off and be gone. But when you take it right from the wok and put it into the bowl and hand it to the waiting guest, then you taste that breath of the wok hei. Just one thought I want to leave you with. There's a lot of details in this, and there's a famous French chef, a guy named Ferdinand Pointe, that had this to say about cooking. He said that success in the kitchen is really the result of a lot of small things properly done. And I think that's exactly the mindset we need to have when we go into the kitchen and we stir fry. There's a lot of things we have to pay attention to. They're going to come at you fast and furious. But if you pay attention to them and you do them properly, this is the result.